So right now it's my pleasure to introduce the founder and CEO of Friendship Public Charter Schools, Mr. Donald Hens.
This is the first of a series of speakers that we are bringing to you because we want to broaden your horizons beyond Friendship, beyond Northeast, but to the world. The reason I asked Dr. Emdin to come here to speak is because I wanted you to see him. One, if you can see him, he's not much older than you, right? But let me give you some information about him, okay? He came to speak to teachers at our opening convocation at the convention center last August. And I really wanted him to come back to talk to you. Dr. Emdin is the associate professor in the Department of Mathematics, Science, and Technology at Columbia University. He serves as Director of Science Education for the Center for Health Equity and Urban Science. He is also the Associate Professor of the Institute for Urban and Minority Teachers at Teachers College, Columbia. He was recently named Minorities in Energy Ambassador for the U.S. Department of Energy and STEM Ambassador for the U.S. Department of State. He's a social critic, science advocate, and he is famous for his commentaries on race, culture, inequality, and education. Now, let me tell you something else about him. He's the creator of something called Hip Hop Ed, a social media movement. He's much sought after as a speaker. I just thought it was really good. I thought you could relate to him. And the purpose of this is not just after he's finished talking, you just fold up. It's really for you to ask him questions. You've got to establish a dialogue. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Dr. Emdin.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. But if you guys don't mind, I'm going to talk from over there instead, just because my slides are there and that's where I can move from. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Yeah. All right. So you guys have heard a lot about my work in the sort of formal biography about my work at Columbia and my work at Harvard and my work with the Department of Energy. But I don't come to talk to you today from the perspective of a Black History Month speaker to give you some information. So I remember myself when I was in high school, a little while back, we had a speaker come in for Black History Month. It was like a speaker series. They brought us all to the auditorium. We had to sit there and listen to this dude. And as he was speaking, I thought, in my head at the time, I thought he was so lame because there was nothing that he had to say that really was any different than what I heard before. And so as a speaker, when I get the opportunity to come and speak to you guys, I really try to keep it a buck, keep it 100 as much as possible, and not talk from the perspective of this person who has these academic accolades, but just talk from the perspective of a real authentic person. So I'm gonna talk as, Chris, who was born in Tacoma Park, whose family moved to Brooklyn in search of a better life or whatever, and really describe my journey to you. Because every time I speak to young people about my work, they always have this idea of oh, this Columbia professor who's done this stuff, he's gotta be this academic. And I remember growing up, coming up, I never really perceived myself as an academic, and so, or as a scholar, or as an intellectual. So my title today is Embracing Our Hybridized Identities, which sounds like a lot of words, but I want you guys to repeat this word after me. Say hybridized. Louder, hybridized. So what does hybridized mean? It's a question. Hybridized kind of means like something that can combine more than one thing together and then be those things at the same time. That's a definition of a hybrid. So like even in science, because I'm a scientist, like when we talk about hybrid plants or hybrid materials, it's like materials that can take a little bit from a whole bunch of different places, combine together and create this thing that's powerful, right? So I've always prided myself on being somebody who has a hybridized identity. And today I'm not really gonna give you information, I'm just gonna share my journey. So when I was sitting where you were, as like a 10th grader, 11th grader, and some of the other 12th graders, there were a few things that were my goals in life. My goals were not to be a professor at Columbia. They were not to be able to do work at Harvard. They were not to be, you know, like some academic genius, whatever it is. Like my goals were very simple. These are my goals. One, to be able to spit bars with Nas, because Nas is my favorite rapper. Two, was to be the additional member of Wu-Tang Clan, because I grew up on Wu-Tang. Does anybody know Wu-Tang at all? Yeah. Right? That's a little old school for some of y'all, you know what I mean? Y'all want to be part of MMG, I want to be part of Wu-Tang, right? To meet this dude named, who played the character as Antoine Fisher, because my parents, like, we didn't have that much coming up, but my parents adopted 3 young men, and they're like my brothers. So I love the movie Antoine Fisher, and I love that character. It was also to be able to go to the White House, just so I could stun on my teachers, because I remember in school, I had this one teacher who was like, Chris, you don't know anything. You'd never make anything. And he always talked about how he had visited the White House. So like I just wanted to go to the White House and prove that teacher wrong. And then the last was to be in the New York Times. And pretty much because the New York Times music section always featured like a lot of the MCs I grew up with. So those are my goals. My goals were not Columbia University, were not anything else. In fact, as a high school student, I actually applied to get into Columbia University and I didn't get in. But you know, it is what it is. I'm stuck on them now. So these are my goals. And those goals were really interesting to me because I thought that the way that I was going to be able to meet those goals were to be a rapper. Because when I grew up, when I was growing up, what I wanted to be was a rapper. And I was like, well, if I spit enough bars and I'm nice enough on the mic, then I'll be able to meet and accomplish these goals. And you know, I still spit bars, like, you know, I still answer, like, you know, I was a battle rapper for a very long time, so I would, you know, I could spit something light, like, listen, I'm an MC. If you say spit something, I'm gonna spit something, right? So if I hit a street corner, for example, and it was like a battle rap, I would spit something like, yo, may I have your attention? I'm toting extreme lyrical weapons, plus rocking a suit equipped with generic MC deflection. So any MC in the house run like the Reverend, or you're gonna see hell of heaven in less than 11 seconds. I got wild. So I could do that, right? And I thought that was gonna help me with my goals. But here's what I wanted to say to you guys, like my mission for today is this. Like as dope as I was at spitting bars, I also understood something really important, which was this. You can go to any street corner anywhere in the United States of America and be like, yo, I got bars, and 50 people gonna roll up on you and start spitting too. Like, the chance of everybody who had skills on the mic to be able to make it successfully was not that high. Even though I felt like I was nicer than anybody else. And so my way to be able to really figure it out was to be like, yo, what if I really embraced like my authentic identity? And so, so all my goals I was able to meet. So I was able to spit bars with Nas and have a conversation with him. Like I was able to meet Jizzle from the Wu-Tang Clan. That was like my idol growing up. I was able to meet the dude who played Antoine Fisher, Derek Loops, shout out to homie Derek, who's also now on Empire doing his thing. I was able to visit the White House as an invitation there to be a speaker. I was able to be on the New York Times. So everything that I wanted to accomplish when I was a kid, I made it. So the question was, I thought I was gonna be able to do it by spitting bars. That didn't quite work out, so how did I do it? It's a question, right? And the way I ended up doing it in many ways was I was able to, at some point, figure out that I needed to have a hybridized identity. To be able to combine more than one thing together and make what it is I wanted to do. I'm sorry, just a quick time out. I just had to holler at my boy over here. Like, his Malcolm X game is on fleek right now. Like, he got the Malcolm X glasses, the bow tie, like he looks like Malcolm X. So the question was, how was I, and you got the pose right now. Like, you got the pose, that's the Malcolm X pose. But you ain't even know it. So the question was, how was I able to accomplish these things? So the way I was able to do it in many ways was, I really went back and I thought about when I was in that school at that one time, having to do this, like, this Black History Month speaker. And this is actually a little thing from Jeopardy recently. It was really funny. Where, you know, like this is a Jeopardy board on the side. They have all the questions. And they answered all the questions. And the only place that was left was African American history because ain't nobody wanted to answer those questions. And I thought that was fascinating because to me, that's where I see myself. I see myself at the intersections of the places where nobody wants to go to, but I need to embrace that to be able to be what I want to do. So just like I spit those bars in the beginning, I had to be able to convert that verse or those bars into spitting something about something that people thought I couldn't do. Because it was easy for me to be a rapper, but it wasn't easy for me to be a physicist, or be a scientist. So I flipped it and I was like, okay, well, how about I spit a science verse? Like, yo, I'm a physicist, lyricist, spitting this ridiculousness, so witness the ignorance I dismiss. Numerous laws of motion be the topic of the course, because things in motion stay in motion unless they hit on a balanced force. Well, next up's the second law of situation and summation, force equals mass of acceleration. That's the second law, the Newton force law. So if you want more, then the third law is the law. So every force has an opposite force, and every action has an equal plus opposite reaction. The sum of all objects at rest is zero. That's an object is no longer relaxing. I'm in a motion, that's changing location. Till it hits traction, the coefficient of friction. And then it all comes to a full stop. And there goes Newton laws over hip hop. But hold up, I'm off Newton. I'm on an Einstein. I like Einstein because Einstein's mind is like mine. His formula was E equals MC squared, which is weird because me is your favorite MC squared. Yeah. So why did I spit that bar real quick is that I was able to understand and get into my scientific self by embracing this hybridized identity to be hip hop and science at the same time. A lot of y'all who are in here today, just by virtue of being from DC, you know what I mean, like living in the hood, like having different mentalities, we're oftentimes programmed to believe that we've got to choose what self you want to be. So everybody's like, well, you know, there's always that kid who's like the kid who's smart, and everybody's like, yeah, he's going to be successful, he's going to make it, he's going to be a genius, right? And there's the other kid who's just chilling, and everybody writes a story about him, and like, oh, he can't make it, he won't be able to do all these things. And the reality is that anybody who's able to be great in the world is actually not the people who people can determine what they're going to do. It's those who are able to take things that seemingly don't connect and embrace those things at the same time to be who you want to be. So that's why I started off talking about hybridized identity. A hybridized identity means that you could be hip-hop and scientific, which is what I choose to do, right? You could be mathematical and artistic. You could dress fly and still got crazy grace and stunting on cats. Like, it's okay for you to be able to embrace who you authentically are and still be able to convert that to academics. And why is that important? Because we know that if you do whatever it is that you like to do and that you're good at naturally, like for me was MCing, and you combine that with academics, you actually go further than people who just do it regularly. Like, so whenever I go to a conference now, and we have conversations about science and science outreach, and somebody else got a PhD crazy degree in science, and I come in there like, yeah, I got that too. And I spit bars and got swag, right? So now I got a one-up on whoever else it is who's just doing it the regular way by combining all those things and making who I am. Y'all get my point? Yeah. Now, that connects to African American history in many ways because that is part of the history of black folks in this country. In this country, when we talk about Black History Month, everybody who is of color, who's been able to be successful, has done that because they've been able to embrace that thing about them that's different that the world thought they couldn't do. So I'm gonna give y'all a really quick Black History Month lesson about some folks that people don't recognize are scientists and mathematicians, but actually are. So I'm gonna first talk about who I call the big homie, Thomas Fuller. Who here has heard about Thomas Fuller before? 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, not enough people. So let me tell you the story about Thomas Fuller. Thomas Fuller was this dude who was a slave. And he grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. And he lived from 1710 to 1790. I know that's a lot of words, but that's his obituary. But let's read lines of his obituary. They're like, died, Negro Tom, the famous African calculator, aged 80 years. He was the property of Mrs. Elizabeth Cox of Alexandria. Tom was a very black man. Like they just described him crazy, right? And if you read his obituary, they said one thing that's really powerful about Thomas Fuller, which was that Thomas Fuller never knew how to read or write his whole entire life, right? But everybody who knew him, who was like in his hood, like in the slave quarters, knew that even though he couldn't read or write, he was really, really smart. So, like, he'd be able to calculate things really quickly. He'd be like, Tom, how do you get from here to here really quickly? He'd be like, oh, that's 5.73 miles. And they're like, yo, how do you do this and you can't read or write? So they heard about the story about Thomas Fuller, and then the folks who had the power at the time, the people who were actually like who held the slaves, were like, yo, that Negro Tom thinks he's smart. Check this out. Let's challenge him. So they get Thomas Fuller to bring him out of the slave quarters. They stand him up. They get a whole bunch of scientists and mathematicians who only know how to do things one way. They had their pens, their papers. They know how to read and write. And they were like, let's put out a question. And the question is, how many days, minutes, and hours are there between, and they give them like a time span. Let's say, like, for example, 1710 to 1740. And they all sitting there with their pen and paper doing what? Writing, calculating. You know, they got calculators going. And Thomas Fuller, could he read or write? So what is he doing? Just sitting there. And so now, all of a sudden, people on the side were like, yo, we got the answer. So they get up, they got the answer. Like, it's not like the Kanye moment, like, you ain't got the answer, so like, I got the answers, right? So he got up, they said they had the answer, and they're like, okay, so what's your answer? And the guy gives out the answer. And then another dude who had a pen and paper and calculator also came up, and he had the answer. So now, they got an answer, so that means it's the right answer, right? Because the general consensus is that that's what the answer is. Thomas Fuller's still sitting there like this, right? Then Thomas Fuller raises his hand. He says, respectfully, I would like to say that the answers that you guys had come up with was wrong. And it was crazy, right? It was almost like World Star, like, ooh, it was like Sarkeesian got here, like, ooh, it was crazy. Everybody was like upset because it was like, it was a big moment, right? So they're like, how could you say that? Like, this slave who can't read or write, he's challenging our answer? And Tom said, the issue is that you forgot to account for the leap years. Y'all don't feel that? Like, because during the leap years, sometimes the days got short. Like, they are calculating using what they know with their mind, and he's calculating using what he knows inside and internally, and actually getting the answer right and stunting on them cats who thought they couldn't really do, like, they could do better than he was. And what Thomas Fuller was doing at that point was showcasing a hybridized identity. This ability to be able to do math in a way that was different from how they did it. Like, he would calculate it in his head, come up with the idea. He was almost like he was freestyling. So if you see MCs freestyling today and kicking rhymes off the top of their head, in essence, they are this generation's version of Thomas Fuller. Except Thomas Fuller was doing that with math and his math skills, but they're doing it how? Just spitting bars. Now, could you imagine for everybody who rhymes or who spits, who got verses, who could freestyle? If you were able to go back to your internal Thomas Fuller because you have the same skills he had, and combine that freestyle skill, back to the mathematical skill, plus the fact that you can read and write, which he didn't have an opportunity to do, you changed the whole game. You flipped the whole system on his head. And that's what I'm asking y'all to do today, is to always think about the fact that just because they believe that this is the only lane I could do it in, just because Thomas Fuller's instance, he couldn't read or write, in this instance, just because I come from a certain neighborhood, or just because I look a certain way, or dress a certain way, that does not limit my ability to be able to be successful in their own domains, if you choose to be able to flip it on them and combine them all at the same time. Every single time that we listen to what they say and only do one thing, we're actually doing a disservice to the legacy of Thomas Fuller. Y'all feel me on that? Like this dude who couldn't read or write and was still killing them in a math game. When we here now have the opportunity to read and write and have a passport to the world and we choose not to do it, we are actually doing disservice to his name. Another person I want to talk about real quick, of course everybody knows because it's Black History Month, is who? Harriet Tubman. Who's heard of Harriet Tubman? Okay, because y'all ain't hear about Thomas Fuller. You ain't hear about Harriet Tubman because we haven't had some words, right? But every time you hear about Harriet Tubman, what do you hear about her? Underground Railroad, what else? Freed the slaves.
She was mean.
Anything else? Yeah.
She was like 6 foot.
Huh? She was like 6 foot, she was a tall woman. All those things are true. But guess what? How many of y'all have heard about Harriet Tubman in the context of the fact that Harriet Tubman was a crazy scientist? Of course you didn't hear that. Because there's a narrative about Harriet Tubman, like, she did great things. She freed the slaves, she was 6 foot tall, she was amazing, but how did she free those slaves? She was able to identify a star pattern, look up in there, identify where the North Star was, use that star as a navigation technique, then look at the ecology of the environment around her, and be able to, like, literally calculate how it is to be able to be where you are, looking at the star, navigate north to free the slaves. There are multi-million-dollar programs that are done by scientists and astrobiologists and actual scientists to be able to do the exact same thing that Harriet Tubman did just by virtue of being a slave and looking up at the skies. Now, we listen to a story about her and we limit her to being just a person who freed slaves. It's an amazing thing to do. But she was also a person who used her science and math skills that's actually deep in her blood and using that to be able to do something powerful. Harriet Tubman had a hybridized identity. Y'all get where I'm going with this? Yeah. So now let's move on a little bit. Y'all can't really see the image, but these are some young kids in New Guinea, right? And in New Guinea, they were common. You hear that?
Is that?
I don't know if y'all really heard it, but there are these kids in New Guinea who essentially are you, because they have urine, black and brown skin in a context where they don't have anything. Literally, what they have is the clothes on their backs. And if you look at that image, ain't no clothes on their backs, right? But what they were doing in that moment is that they're learning how to count. They're counting using this mathematical system. And if you notice anything about those words, what was it? They kind of were rhyming. Like, each word was rhyming. And they went and counted from 1 all the way up to 26 and stopped at 26. Now, that, for a lot of folks, is like, oh, this is some poor kids in Africa who were counting. But people who are advanced mathematicians are like, yo, they counted 1 in rhyme, 2 to 26 and stopped. In English, in a normal numeric system, you go from 1 to 10 and then stop, right? Now, the alphanumeric system, I'm getting real heavy on y'all real quick, from A to Z has how many characters? 26. So they have a numerical system that actually is aligned to our alphanumeric system. Without ever going to school and having an education, a more complex counting system than we've ever imagined or thought of before. Why? Because they're able to embrace their hybridized identities, engage in this counting while rhyming and learning all at the same time. Like 2 Chainz would say, at the same damn time. All right, so, I may have, forgive me if I did. And now I just want to break some points down to science again, right? So as a professor, a lot of the work I get to do is the research. And in my research, what I get to do is like, I'm a scientist by training. I get to look at like, how do you make better scientists? So I'm gonna tell y'all real quick about one of my projects, actually one of my favorite projects. And the reason it's my favorite project is because my university has to pay me to go to rap concerts to study rappers and scientists, which is fun. So I go out and I look at all the greatest scientists known to man. So name like one famous scientist that you know. Darwin. Who? Okay, you got to say, this is a scientist I know in the building, that's what's up, right? Einstein. So I looked at all the most famous and brilliant scientists of our time. The funny thing about this is, when we were identifying who the greatest scientist of our time was, I looked at all the images, and all those images didn't look anything like people of color. Like Einstein, Niels Bohr, Darwin, whatever else it was. But I looked at all these scientists, and my job was to find out what it is that made them great scientists. So I found all these things. One, they had really keen observation skills, meaning that they were able to look into the world and like identify things. They were skeptics, curious, they used metaphors and analogies, all these things, right? So I went up on my research, and my job was to find out what population today has the same skills as those great scientists. Guess who ended up having the same skills as those scientists? African Americans, of course, but even more specific than that, which is fascinating to me. Rappers. I know. Rappers, MCs, like people who are like the most famous rappers that you know, actually were the population amongst the country who had the same skill set of the most prolific and brilliant scientists that we've ever known. Now, how many rappers are actually scientists? Not that many. But in the process of writing their rhymes, they had the same skills. How? Keen observation skills. You look at an environment, you look at the scan the environment, you write detailed notes about that environment. You speak a metaphor and analogy using different words to combine different words. You have an active imagination. Like every single skill set of the best scientists ever were MCs. They were African American people who were actually in positions in the world where they were the lowest possible because they were rappers. But yet they had the same skill set. Take this a little further, and I was sharing this with the adults last time I met with them, because I gotta flip the science real quick. I'm gonna skip, let me skip. the neuroscience, which is heavy. Hold on. This right here is it. And this is important for you guys to recognize. Because of these discoveries, a lot of scientists went and took kids who rap, or kids who were into rap. You don't actually have to be a rapper. You just have to be a person who's actively listening and consuming rap. But they took them into a laboratory and they hooked up these things to their heads. They call them fMRIs. It stands for a frequency magnetic resonance instrument, which is like a thing that measures your brain activity, right? So they hooked these things to their brains, like boom, and they had them engaging where they do normally. So they had these kids rhyming or freestyling. As they were rhyming, guess what was happening? The parts of their brain that controls active behavior and being engaged and learning actively was going crazy. It's a part of your brain called the medial prefrontal cortex. And that part of the brain controls when you're actively learning. That part of the brain was going crazy when these kids were rhyming or even engaging in rap. In schools, we measured the same fMRIs with kids who were just in schools learning regularly when they were just sitting there and just being one person. And guess what? The dorsolateral region of the brain that controls behavior was acting crazy. In essence, what the science proved was that by engaging in music, verb, excitement, lyric writing, that actually activates your ability to be able to soak in information better and learn better. Yeah, for all of us who are in here right now, we only use those skills when? The second we leave school. Now can you imagine what you could do if you realize that that self that you are outside of school, if you use that same skill set in school, you can flip it on them completely. Y'all feel me on this? Like, I'm hyped about it. I don't know if y'all hyped about it. I'm hyped about it. So I actually want to get some time for questions. But I want you guys to understand this really basic construct here. This is, it might be over your heads a little bit. I'm talking for a while, but I want y'all to get this right here. Every human being, they only have a certain part of themselves that you see. Like, your conscious is what you see. Like you right here who's like death out fly, Malcolm X type, right? What you see from him right now is actually only 15% of who he actually is. The majority of our personality, the 85% of that, is actually unseen. So everything that you see is not even a full person. Y'all all know that. You ever met this dude who you see him in school, he act like a gangster, and you see him in the hood, and he go to church every Sunday? Like those kind of kids, is that when you enter into a certain place, you put a certain personality on, and in different places you have different personalities. What I'm telling y'all today is when you leave here, go back and think about what makes you tick. The things that really make you excited about being in the world. And combine that with the 15% that everybody sees. And the minute that you do that, you transform how the world looks at you. Finally, in closing, I want y'all to see this image. Right? So this is an image of Jizza from Wu-Tang Clan. Like the group I wanted to be with my whole entire life. And this image almost looks like it's negative, right? Like, dude is sitting there holding two guns up. It's the most, it's scary just to see that image, right? So I'm having a conversation with him about, yo, what's up with the image? Because I met him actually at a meeting at a scientist's house. Like crazy, just from Wu-Tang, a scientist's house. Yeah. And I was like, yo, what you doing here? And he was like, yeah, I'm a scientist. I want to learn more science. I was like, how is that possible? And he was telling me a story about how when he was in school, he actually dropped out in the 10th grade to start Wu-Tang Clan. And a couple years later, after they went platinum, toured the globe, whatever, he came back and he was thinking about himself. He was like, yo, I really wanted to be scientist. That's what I was really into. So I'm like, what about this image? And when you talk about this image, he says, oh, this right here, that's what the label wanted us to do. The company was like, yo, if you put the guns up, whatever, you act thugged out, people are gonna respond to the music, that's what they're really into. He was like, this doesn't even reflect anything about who I am. This same dude with the two guns up is not the real person. This is actually the real person. It's the same dude, right? This is him in a lab at MIT conducting research, right? Because later on in life, years later, he comes to realize that everything that he was doing for a very long time was not necessarily who he was. It was a lane of what people thought he could be. And the minute that he tapped into the place of combining them all together, he flipped it. Now his new album is called Dark Matter. He's literally just rapping a whole album about science concepts in the world. And why is that important for y'all? I'm gonna close here real quick and answer some questions. And I think this is the most important piece. I don't know, y'all see the president on there maybe. And this is important, especially when we talk about Black History Month. There are a lot of stuff that's going on in the world that you guys have all inherited. We've got the stuff that's going on in Ferguson, you've got the stuff that's going on in New York, everything else. And you have a generation right now, especially as an 11th grader, 12th grader, where you can't necessarily You can't talk about all the things that bother you. Like there was a generation in the 60s and 70s where they would like, they turn up, like something was crazy, they go protest, like they get, you know, hit by hoses, like they were engaged in a real actual fight for civil rights like every single day of their lives. You guys are here now, there's a lot of stuff going on, there's a lot of things that limit you from being able to do that, because that's just the way the world works, unfortunately, right? But guess what the president was saying here, and actually the First Lady also said this 2 days ago. While there was bigger civil rights issues of our time, education is a civil rights issue of this generation. Let me tell you why I say that. A lot of things on the surface look like it's gotten a lot better, but when you talk about education, it's the one thing that significantly has remained the same, meaning there's still black and brown people underperforming, there's still schools that are dilapidated, there's still people like you, like right now that I'm looking at you, who when you go into certain academic spaces, people are looking at you and having a perception that you're not intellectual just by virtue of you being there. So at the past generations, like they were fighting for civil rights by protesting. Do you know how you become a civil rights leader in this generation? By getting an education. That's the last frontier. Every single time that you go in there to get inspired, to get a better grade, every time you go in there being authentically who you are and saying, I'm not just this thug, I'm a thug and an intellectual. I'm not just an academic, I'm also like, I'm a racademic. Like every single time that you mix these two identities together to be successful in education, you actually become a civil rights fighter for this generation. And those of y'all who choose, if you ever choose, to allow what they say about you to define who you are in education, not only are you betraying Thomas Fuller and betraying Harriet Tubman, but you're losing an opportunity to be a part of a civil rights generation fight of this time. So you gotta ask yourselves, are you gonna betray them or are you gonna be a revolutionary? Ask yourself that now, and I'm done. I answered your question. All right. I'm not going to open up the space. I'm not challenging y'all a little bit. I'm going to open up the space for y'all to ask me some questions. Also, let me do this, because you know my social media game is tight. If you're like a little bit apprehensive about asking questions, although you shouldn't, and you want to hit me up, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. That's my Twitter, my Instagram, and my hashtag is HipHopEd. We can talk about that HipHopEd in a little bit. Matter of fact, let me just say that really quickly about social media. I meant to say this earlier. You know, the other way that you can really engage right now to be more than what people explain you to do is to use your social media in a different way. Like I talk to young people all the time. Like, yo, you got an Instagram? Yep, I got an Instagram. You got a Twitter? Yep, I got a Twitter. What you doing with it? Watching twerk videos. Like, that's not the point of social media. Let me tell you why that's important to talk about. Look, nowadays, I work to be able to let folks into my university, like here in the admissions committee. Do you know that admissions committees are no longer just looking at your grades and looking at your whatever else it is? They are literally going online, Googling you, tracing back your experiences, and looking at the image that they see on social media as a representative of who you are. So if you have these tools in front of you, and you're using that to portray negative, and a lot of y'all portray negative, so I do sometimes portray negative even though that's not who you are. But you know, you're trying to just be whatever it is. They are using that to define you, which limits your opportunities. So what you gotta do now is you gotta flip the game on them. How do you flip the game on them? Make your social media game tight. Create a social media account that has your real name, right? And on that social media account, follow people who are leaders, follow people who are icons, follow people who are positive. You wanna go to university in a year or 2 years, follow the university. Find out the name of the person who's on the admissions committee. Follow them. Share positive quotes. So if they ever go on there and search for who you are, you know what I mean? They don't see something negative. They see the fact that you actually have an identity that proves that there's something different. So I'm just putting y'all on game real quick. Like, the way you have to flip this whole game is that you have to beat them at their own game. So what they're gonna use to define you as negative, you gotta use for them to be able to see you as positive. All right? So I'm all wrapped up, and I answer whatever questions y'all got now.
My name is Delonte.
Delonte, nice to meet you, sir.
How you doing? I was just interested and wondering, like, did you ever take any psychology classes or anything?
Yeah, so Delonte's question, I don't know if y'all heard of it, was if I took psychology classes. So yeah, I took psychology classes. I also took a lot of sociology classes. So, like, I'm a science, let me tell you why I chose science. Anybody here into science or like science at all? couple of y'all. Good, this is good. Let me tell you why science is important, right? So, in my work with the Department of Energy, there's a couple of things we just figured out. One, people who work in STEM careers, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they make 26 times more money than people who work in other careers. People, like, literally, like this one's just regular. Like, let's say you work in another career and you're making $1, I'm making that times 26 just off that by virtue of being where I'm in. Now, people all the time say, well, science is hard, math is hard. It's not hard. Like, literally, it's just, if you can put the same effort into doing that as we do whatever else, like, if I put the same kind of effort I put to put my outfits together because I stay clean, like, if I put that same effort into my science and math, like, you could be able to flip it easy. It's just about perseverance. And we come from a people that are perseverant by nature. Now, you get into that field, you're making more money than everybody else. So what you want to do is you want to take the sociology classes and your psychology classes and also engage in science. Why? Because you know science has more currency. Science is who they perceive as the best and brightest. So you can do all at the same time. So right now, I teach classes in science, I teach classes in multicultural education, but I combine science and education, psychology and sociology. And the more you're able to combine multiple things, then it makes you original. So you want to be able to mix them all up. All right? It's a good question. Any other questions, thoughts? Yes, sir. Oh, you got a mic over there?
My name's Jeff, and my name is really Jeff. But how many rap battles have you been in, and would you ever, if you had, would you battle Arsenal the Rebel?
I've been in a bunch of rap battles like my entire career, like as an MC, and even once in a while I'll still jump in the cypher just to like show and prove. But you guys ever follow the rap battle circuit? You guys know who Mook is? Murder Mook?
Yeah.
I want to show y'all something. Mook is my dude too. But this is like the other day I was at, I don't know if you guys know Hot 97. It's a New York City like hip hop station. They all over the place. So I'm at Hot 97. We're having a conversation about battle rap, and Mook is in, and I'm talking to Mook about my work, and Mook says this.
Something oratory and speech and things like that. I would have my speech written in the rhyme and I would just remember it back. So that's definitely dope what y'all doing. Much love.
Ladies and gentlemen, Murder Mook, one of the top, if not the top, freestyle battle rappers of our time, saying that he was in school.
Oh, definitely. Went to college
and used hip hop to be able to be better.
Definitely.
Thank you, my brother. I appreciate you.
No problem, man. Keep it up.
Thank you.
I don't know if y'all heard everything Mook said, but Mook was essentially saying like, yo, one, he went to college, which a lot of people don't know, and he actually went to college, played ball, and got pretty good grades. Like, and these cats sometimes, like, I wish they would just be like, yo, just be proud about it. Like, Wale, him, like so many of them went 2 Chainz with like almost a 4.0 GPA, but they don't really talk about it. I don't know why. But like Mook was saying on that verse, like, yo, I went to college, like, and writing rhymes helped me to be better as an MC, but I also use my MC skills to be better as an academic and do well. And so, like, I've been in space with a bunch of MCs who actually, on the low, that helped them to be academically successful.
So, I was going to ask who you think the top 3 battle rappers?
Top 3 battle rappers right now, definitely got to give it to Mook. DNA is nice. I don't like Daylight like that. I think he's like
Charlie Clips.
Clips is nice also. Matter of fact, there was I don't know if you guys ever saw this battle. I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a big battle rap crowd. Did y'all ever see this battle right here with DNA?
Yes.
You saw that? I'm not gonna play here because of the language, because the language is problematic. But in this verse, DNA was battling, I forgot what the other dude is, but he actually started spitting this verse, and he was battling DNA, and he actually broke down the word DNA in a scientific way. So he like talked about how DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, how it splits, about chromosomes, etc. Like he's actually like through battling a dude named DNA, understanding the concept of DNA and spitting it in his bars. And that's what I want everybody to be able to do, to be able to mix all this stuff together, because you can't do it. Like we all think we can, but we can't do it. So, any other question? You got a question? Yeah.
Just wanted to Jay-Z had said like most of his raps that he made was like in 5 minutes and he was the best.
Right.
So I was like, is freestyling to you like that you made? Like you ever made some stuff that you wrote?
I think what freestyle does to me is that when you do freestyle rap, it lets you know exactly where your consciousness is at that time. Like if you hear MC freestyling, whatever they're saying is actually how they're feeling in that moment. But I love the art of going back and reconstructing rhymes. Like, let me freestyle it, then go write it down, then go back and rework it and reflip it and add new things. So like one of the favorite things I do and this is not only for science, in any subject matter, like I'll write a verse about anything, and then I'll go study something crazy, like study some like neurobiology. And then I'll take those neurobiology concepts and I try to put them in my rhymes to make my rhyme sound better. And so now when I spit, I'm spitting something regular, and I'm hitting these new concepts in there. And the thing about that is, whenever I talk about adding neurobiology to a verse, people are like, yo, what? Adding neurobiology? You go into a cycle or into a battle and you spit something that they never heard before. It doesn't matter. Look, intelligence always beats ignorance. Let me say this to you again. Intelligence always beats ignorance. I don't care if you're rapping, giving a speech, whatever else it is. Once you come there with something that people haven't heard before and it's scientifically and mathematically accurate, that'll always win. Always. Question?
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Are you pushing?
Young Malcolm X. Sorry.
Are you pushing to get your PhD?
I actually have my PhD. I'm not trying to stunt, but I am kind of stunting, like shaking. But I actually have, I have 3 undergraduate degrees. My undergraduate degrees are in physical anthropology, biology, and chemistry. My master's degree is in natural sciences, and I have a PhD in urban education with a specialization in science, math, and technology.
Where do you get your inspiration?
I get my inspiration from y'all. Like whenever I go to engage with young people, I get inspired. And I also get inspiration from like the world. Like I think it's important for us to know that inspiration comes from anywhere. So like Kanye West had this line when Ye was like, I could let the dream killers kill my self-esteem, use their arrogance and sustain the power of my dreams. Like that inspires me. When I go and give a speech to young people, and I know not everybody might hear everything I'm saying, but like 2 of y'all are thinking deeply about it and thinking about the world differently, that inspires me. So I just get inspired by doing more of this work. 30 something. Yeah, questions over here? Oh, back here, I'm sorry, pardon me.
Hey, my name is Casey.
Hey, Casey, what up?
I was saying, what's your favorite song from 36 Chains?
Oh, man. Probably Protect Your Neck. But you're a real fan if you know 36 Chains, so shout out to you. Probably Protect, or Cream. Yeah.
You said you're a scientist, right?
Yes, sir.
Like, what made you not want to sit behind a desk or stay in a lab and study things? What made you want to be a teacher and come and talk to people like us?
So, yeah, I think it's a good question. So I think, let me tell you a story, experience I had. After I got my master's degree, I'm sitting there one day, I get my first job as an official scientist, and that first job was crazy. I was making more money than my mom and my dad combined, my yearly salary. And I was sitting there, and something hit me. And what hit me was that I remember, I was the one black kid in this whole big office in this master's program, and I looked around, and I was like, why am I the only one here? And all I could think about was when I was coming up, I knew kids that were mad smart. When I say mad smart, literally, an album will come out today, by tomorrow they know all the lyrics. Like I'm talking about kids who, you heard them freestyle, they were super brilliant. So I started asking myself, I know I'm not the smartest person in the world. I can admit that. I'm very, very far from it. And I see kids who are brilliant every day. I come here to hang out with y'all. I'm already hearing, as I'm speaking, I'm listening to kids who are saying comments on the low. And I'm like, that's so insightful. I'm not trying to put you on blast, but I was just speaking earlier, and he echoed what I said, and then said a little extra something like, wow, that's super insightful. And so I'm like, how would it be if I was in this job making X amount of money, and the next kid who's brilliant is sitting in the audience, and because he didn't get a chance to have somebody motivate him or tell him about it, he loses that opportunity. Then I would be doing Thomas Fuller a disservice. So that's why I chose to do this work.
Yeah. So last question.
Last question?
How you doing, sir?
How's it going, sir? What's your name, sir?
Adrian Moseright.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you too. My question is, since you're so well accomplished,
Do you ever find time to pursue your rapping career or that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. I still do it. Like, you never, let me tell y'all again, if there's one message I want to leave out, like you don't have to choose. Like you don't have to choose between one thing or the other thing. Like you don't have to say, oh, I'm gonna be an academic and be accomplished, so I'm not ever gonna be cool and hang out in the hood no more. Like, you could do both at the same time. So I still spit all the time. I spit a little verse this morning. If I'm gonna go hang out with my friends, I work with this company, Rap Genius, so they have a bunch of MCs there, and their rappers rapping, I'll spit with them. Like, it's not the main thing I do in life, but I still pursue that. I still like to write rhymes. Some of the rhymes I write, I don't have to perform them, because I know that as an academic, I'm able to do better for myself, but I still pursue my love because it's what I love to do. I never had to choose, and you don't have to choose either. So I think that was the last question. I thank you guys so much for having me. Stay in touch with me, all right? An inspirational quote. From me or just generally?
You. Rap. Spit it to him.
Spit it to y'all. There's no force in the world that could ever harm me. They couldn't even disarm me if they brought the U.S. Army. And they hardly the gods be with the body that guard me, probably improperly and awkwardly got me mixed with mediocrity. I'm the black Socrates. I can flash paper that's green like broccoli, so cats walk umbralically with the intention to body me. But I'm sorry, G, you can't beat me. Check this. Before you count me out, write a death wish, and that's it.